Strength. That's the core of Sith philosophy. Strength drawn from passion, cultivated through pain, and sharpened by power. Where the Jedi preach serenity and selflessness, the Sith exalt desire. It is this fundamental divide that shaped the fate of the galaxy for generations. But within that craving for dominance lies the seed of something far darker, something corrosive. The Sith Order was not just built on ambition, it was built on betrayal. From the earliest exiles who turned from the Jedi Order to the last gasping embers of the Galactic Empire, Sith history is marked by a blood-soaked trail of one Sith betraying another. In their world, treachery is not considered dishonorable, it's expected. A master should be overthrown by a more powerful apprentice. That's the natural cycle, the supposed engine of evolution. Yet there's a difference between succession and sabotage, between ambition and annihilation. Some Sith didn't betray their masters to ascend. They did it to burn everything down. To understand these betrayals, we have to understand the foundation. Long before Darth Vader, long before the Clone Wars, the Sith were not a pair of shadowy figures in the dark. They were an empire, a whole civilization of force wielders ruled by cruelty, cunning, and conquest. They didn't just tolerate infighting, they thrived on it. Councils of lords clashed constantly, apprentices murdered their peers, and entire fleets turned on each other mid-battle. No unity, no mercy, only the hunger to rule. This chaos led to their collapse, but one survivor, Darth Bane, watched the ruins and learned a terrible lesson. The Sith were too many, too loud, too easily destroyed by the Jedi because they were always destroying themselves first. So Bane changed everything. He created the rule of two, one master, one apprentice, no armies, no councils, just a single line of succession where each Sith would embody the full power of the dark side. It was an elegant solution, on the surface, but it didn't erase the nature of the Sith. It refined it, made it colder, more patient, more lethal. The apprentice was expected to kill the master eventually. That was the point. But even within this strict structure, deception festered. Apprentices plotted before they were ready. Masters refused to die. Some sought immortality. Others took secret apprentices or manipulated entire factions behind their partner's back. This wasn't growth. It was corrosion, slow and constant. And over time, that corrosion became a pattern. Sith betrayals began to leave deeper scars. They didn't just kill rivals. They sabotaged plans, exposed hidden networks, turned loyal soldiers into enemies. The consequences were catastrophic. Civil wars that never needed to happen. Empires that collapsed before they even began. Darths who murdered their own lineages out of spite. Even worse, some betrayals were so profound that they nearly unmade the Sith entirely. Masters who turned on the very philosophy they once preached. Apprentices who rejected the dark side not because they failed, but because they saw what it turned them into. These weren't rebels. They weren't martyrs. They were rot given form. And they knew it. Over thousands of years from the Old Republic to the Imperial era, Sith-on-Sith treachery became a cycle, a ritual. It was not always loud. It often came quietly, in whispered promises, subtle poisons, altered holocrons, vanishing allies. Some betrayals never reached the public record. Some names were stripped from tombs, their stories broken across 100 forgotten datapads. The Order kept their legacy buried to maintain the illusion of dominance, but cracks remain. One might think the Jedi were the greatest enemy the Sith ever faced. They weren't. The Sith lost more power, more potential, and more empires to each other than to any Jedi blade. And for those who survived their betrayal, those who walked away with blood on their hands and no order left to call home. The cost was never just victory. It was loneliness, exile, obsession. Some became wanderers, hunted by their own creations. Others turned into ghosts, figures whose warnings now echo through ruins and war-torn memories. This story isn't one of justice. There's no balance here, no redemption arc. These aren't tales of villains undone by heroes. They're stories of villains undone by themselves. Because in the Sith Order, destruction comes from within. In the chapters that follow, we'll examine the worst of them. Not the boldest, not the strongest, the most treacherous. Lords who didn't just rise through the ranks, they buried them. Figures whose betrayals shattered dynasties, ended bloodlines, and left nothing but smoke where empires once stood. Some names will be familiar. Others were deliberately scrubbed from Sith records. But each one left behind consequences the galaxy still hasn't recovered from. Because sometimes the deadliest wound isn't struck by the enemy. It's the one from the hand you trusted. And in the Sith Order, that hand always holds a blade. Before Darth Bane, before the Rule of Two, before the Sith Lords were cloaked in secrecy and whispers, there was Ajunta Pall. He wasn't born Sith. He was a Jedi general, a figure of authority and respect during the 100-year darkness, a master of the Force, well-versed in the Jedi Code, and a powerful warrior in a time of violent experimentation. He didn't fall overnight. His descent was gradual, deliberate, and in the end, devastating. The Jedi warned against tampering with life. Ajunta ignored them. He believed the Force was not just something to understand, it was something to control. He began experimenting with alchemy, reshaping flesh, and forging weapons imbued with dark energy. Some of these tools were alive in ways they shouldn't have been. They screamed when they touched air. Others drained light itself, casting shadows where none should fall. When the Jedi Council finally condemned him, he didn't retreat. He gathered those who agreed with him, other Force wielders frustrated by limitations and eager to test the boundaries of reality. Together they broke from the Order, igniting a civil war that scorched the galaxy. The 100-year darkness wasn't just a clash of lightsabers, it was a battle of philosophies. One side believed in restraint, the other believed power was meant to be taken. But Ajunta's betrayal didn't stop with the Jedi. Exiled beyond Republic space, he and his followers stumbled into a forgotten corner of the galaxy, Korriban. There they found a species sensitive to the Force, the Sith. Tribal, fierce, and spiritually attuned, the Sith viewed Ajunta's arrival as divine. He and the other exiles were treated as gods, and they embraced the role. Ajunta became their king. He united their clans, merged their sorcery with his alchemy, and forged an empire in his image. The Sith species became his servants. His generals were his fellow exiles. Together, they built the foundations of the Sith Order. Statues rose, temples stretched across desert plateaus. Blood was currency, and power was law. But something dark stirred beneath Ajunta's crown. He had shared the Sith's power with his followers, but not all of it. In secret, he developed weapons far more potent than the ones his allies wielded. Blades that could tear through minds, artifacts that whispered madness. He feared being overthrown, feared the very betrayal he had once committed. So he hoarded knowledge, kept secrets buried beneath his fortress, and began altering his own body. It wasn't enough. The Sith Lords around him, Ludo, Sorzus, and others, grew suspicious. Infighting began. Some challenged his rule openly, others plotted in silence. What had started as a union of visionaries became a nest of vipers. Ajunta had become the thing he feared, a tyrant surrounded by enemies. Paranoia consumed him. Eventually, his own creations turned against him. He fled. No battle, no duel, just disappearance. His legacy collapsed into civil war. The empire he forged fractured into petty domains. Ajunta hid on a remote world, entombed himself in a labyrinth, and waited. Not for death, for silence. Centuries passed. The Sith evolved. They told stories of the first Dark Lord. Some called him a martyr. Others cursed his name. His legend faded, reduced to rumor and fragmented texts. But his tomb remained. When it was uncovered during the Jedi Civil War, Ajunta's spirit still lingered. Twisted by time, haunted by his own deeds, he no longer spoke with the certainty of a conqueror. He questioned his choices, not to seek forgiveness, but because he no longer believed he had won anything. His power brought only ashes. His empire died by the same knife he once held. And his greatest fear had come true. He was forgotten. His tomb wasn't built to honor him. It was a warning. The blade he once wielded lay rusted, humming with faint echoes of torment. Not a symbol of triumph, a relic of consequence. Ajunta Pall's betrayal didn't just fracture the Jedi, it cursed the Sith. His ambition created a lineage of darkness, but his fear corrupted it from the beginning. Every Sith Lord who came after inherited not just his power, but his paranoia. He taught the galaxy a brutal lesson. Betrayal always comes with a price, even for those who commit it first. The next Sith Lords would pay that price in blood. Marka Ragnos was not the most powerful Sith Lord of his age. He was not the most skilled in sorcery, nor the most gifted with a blade. But he reigned longer than any other Sith in the Empire's golden era, and he did it by turning loyalty into a leash, ambition into a trap, and fear into law. His rule was not defined by what he built, but by what he prevented others from building. He rose to power through calculated brutality, defeating rivals not only in combat, but in court. His throne sat atop a graveyard of Sith who dared to challenge him, and those who never even got the chance. But once crowned Dark Lord of the Sith, Ragnos didn't unify the Empire. He controlled it by keeping it fractured. His Council of Dark Lords wasn't a place of debate. It was a theater. Every meeting, every vote, every agreement was manipulated behind the scenes. He fed his council lies disguised as visions. These visions were never random. He crafted them carefully, illusions of catastrophic futures or false signs of rebellion from rival lords. When a Sith rose too fast, Ragnos whispered to their enemies. When two apprentices grew too close, he forced them into war. He orchestrated chaos, but never let it explode beyond his reach. The Sith believed he saw the future. What they didn't know was that he was scripting it. This deception created the illusion of unity. The Empire flourished, but it did so with a collar around its neck. Ragnos smothered innovation, halted progress, and ensured no one else could match him. Every threat was redirected, reshaped, or extinguished before it matured. He played an empire like a game of Dejarik, sacrificing pawns to protect the illusion of control. Some lords began to suspect the truth, but none lived long enough to expose it. Ragnos ruled for over a century, but his strength eventually faded. His death didn't come with fanfare. It came in silence, no known battle, no formal duel. He simply ceased. But the aftermath was anything but quiet. The Sith Empire, for all its might, was unprepared. There was no designated successor, no plan for transition, just a throne and a dozen would-be heirs with blades drawn. The most prominent of them were Naga Sadow and Ludo Kresh, rivals sharpened by Ragnos's long shadow. Their conflict would soon tear the Sith Empire apart, but that fracture didn't begin with them. It began with Ragnos. who had spent a century ensuring no one else could ever rule as he had. But his manipulation didn't end with his life. His spirit, unnaturally bound to his tomb on Korriban, remained, and it spoke. When Sadow and Kresh clashed before the Dark Council, the spirit of Ragnos appeared, cloaked in fire and echoing power. He declared Sadow the rightful heir. The council obeyed. But this was not an act of wisdom. It was a trap disguised as guidance. Sadow's reign would trigger a disastrous war with the Republic. Billions would die. The Sith would be driven into hiding. Kresh, meanwhile, would die believing he had been betrayed not just by his rival, but by his master's ghost. It was unclear whether the spirit of Ragnos was even real. Some believed it was Sadow's manipulation, others that it was Ragnos himself continuing to control events from beyond death. Either way, the outcome was the same: collapse. Ragnos left behind no true legacy, no teachings, no disciples, only control. He had ruled the Empire at its height and left it without a future. He ensured his supremacy, but ensured that no one could match it afterward. That was his great lie. He promised stability, but delivered paralysis. Even in the centuries that followed, his influence lingered like smoke in a sealed tomb. His face remained carved into the cliffs of Korriban. His voice echoed through forbidden temples. But his example taught Sith a dangerous lesson. Power could be preserved through sabotage. Loyalty to Ragnos was never real. It was a performance demanded under threat. He didn't want heirs. He wanted silence. He didn't nurture the next generation. He crippled it in advance. The Sith who followed would either copy his methods or destroy themselves trying to escape them. Either way, Ragnos had already won. But the seeds of destruction had been sown, and when Naga Sadow took the throne, the illusion of golden rule finally shattered. When Marka Ragnos died, the Sith Empire teetered at the edge of uncertainty. His grip had kept the council divided, but his absence lit a match under the throne. Two contenders rose: Ludo Kresh, a traditionalist who clung to order, and Naga Sadow, a radical driven by vision and hunger. What followed wasn't a debate. It was a slow-motion collapse wrapped in ceremony. Sadow was bold, charismatic, dangerous in a way that didn't rely solely on strength. He believed the Sith should no longer hide in the shadows of the Outer Rim. While others clung to old rituals, he whispered of conquest, of rising beyond Korriban and Ziost to challenge the Republic itself. But to do that, he needed power. And to gain that power, he needed chaos. Sadow staged a crisis. A Republic ship had mistakenly stumbled upon Sith space, sparking panic among the Council. Rather than reveal the truth, that the incursion had been minor, accidental, and easily handled, Sadow orchestrated an elaborate lie. He faked a Republic invasion, sabotaged communication lines, sent assassins to silence captured Jedi, and planted evidence of a looming threat. Then, under the illusion of urgency, he demanded emergency powers to lead the Sith response. Ludo Kresh saw through it. He challenged the claim, accused Sadow of deception, and warned the Council that a war would be suicide. Sadow responded not with a rebuttal, but with force. He orchestrated an attack on his own fortress, making it appear as if Republic forces had already struck Sith worlds. The Council, frightened and angry, rallied behind him. Kresh was declared a traitor. Sadow was granted full military control. With his rival discredited and the path cleared, Sadow unleashed the Sith war machine. But the war he started was built on illusion. His forces were numerous, but untested. His strategy relied heavily on alchemy and illusion magic, tricking enemy fleets into believing they were outnumbered. It worked at first. Republic strongholds fell. Panic spread through the core worlds. To the Sith under his command, it looked like destiny. But illusions crack under pressure. As the Republic adapted, Sadow's tactics lost their edge. He overextended his forces. Supply lines collapsed. Victory turned into retreat. And worse, Kresh had not been killed. He returned from the shadows with loyalists, revealing Sadow's deceptions to the rest of the Sith. Civil war broke out mid-campaign. Sadow's war was no longer against the Republic. It was against his own people. Cornered and desperate, Sadow made a decision that shattered what little remained of his reputation. Rather than attempt to salvage the campaign or protect his forces, he sacrificed them. He rigged his ships with unstable energy cores, turning them into improvised bombs. His own fleet, veterans who had followed him across light years, were used as a distraction so he could escape. It wasn't strategy. It was abandonment. He fled to Yavin 4, deep in the jungles, far from galactic traffic and Sith memory. There, surrounded by temples he commanded Masasi slaves to build, Sadow waited, not to rebuild, not to strike again, but to vanish. His empire was gone, his rivals dead or scattered. His name became a bitter curse whispered among the ruins of Ziost. No holocron carried his teachings. No apprentice rose to continue his legacy. He had burned everything to crown himself, and the fire turned back on him. Yavin 4 became his prison. He placed himself in stasis, unsure if he would ever wake. Centuries later, his spirit would stir when others touched his artifacts, but no rebirth came. The Sith evolved without him. His victories faded into legend. His lies outlived him, echoing through the ashes of a fallen empire. Sadow was not remembered for conquest. He was remembered for catastrophe. His betrayal of Kresh didn't elevate him. It detonated the fragile unity the Sith had held for centuries. The civil war he sparked allowed the Republic to strike at the heart of their territory. His illusions won battles, but they couldn't hold an empire. His final act wasn't a duel or a grand declaration. It was silence, buried beneath stone, surrounded by shadows of his own making. And for the Sith who followed, Yavin 4 stood not as a place of power, but as a lesson. Ambition without discipline devours itself. Exar began as a Jedi, brilliant, restless, and endlessly drawn to forbidden knowledge. He wasn't content with answers. He wanted control. Control over the Force, over history, over fate itself. That obsession led him into ancient archives where Jedi masters whispered warnings and locked doors behind him. He went through those doors anyway. It was on Exar, deep within the tomb of Freeden Nad, that he stopped being a Jedi and became something else entirely. Nad's spirit found him there, not as a guide, but as bait. The long-dead Sith Lord fed Kun promises of power, stoked his pride, and pushed him further into the darkness. Kun submitted, at first, but submission was never part of his plan. He learned everything Nad could offer, then shattered his sarcophagus and obliterated his spirit. It wasn't a betrayal born of fear, it was calculated. Kun never wanted a master, he wanted to devour one. Now armed with knowledge few had ever possessed, Kun left Dixun and turned to Coruscant. But he didn't return to destroy the Jedi Temple. Not yet. He returned to recruit. Using charm, deception, and subtle corruption, he targeted a new generation, students still uncertain in their beliefs. He promised freedom from the Jedi Code, power without restriction, secrets buried by centuries of cowardice, and many followed him. He brought them to Yavin 4, the same moon where Naga Sadow had hidden in failure. Kun transformed into a forge for his new order. He called it the Brotherhood of the Sith, though most of its members didn't fully understand what that meant. They thought they were escaping control, In truth, they were stepping into chains they couldn't see. Kun didn't share power. He fed on it. In a horrific ritual, he slaughtered his fellow Sith lords, not enemies, his own allies. Their deaths weren't a mistake or an accident. They were the price of immortality. Using Sith alchemy, he bound their spirits to himself, anchoring his essence beyond death. They became slaves in death, conscious, aware, and powerless to resist. Their screams echoed through Yavin's temples long after his body was gone. But he wasn't finished. With his power secured, he launched a campaign against the Republic. His forces were few but devastating. Jedi Masters were murdered in their sanctuaries. Libraries were burned. Holocrons shattered. He forged alliances with Mandalorians and warlords, weaponized chaos, and left scars that would take centuries to heal. But his greatest weapon wasn't a blade or a fleet. It was Ulic Qel-Droma. Qel-Droma had been a Jedi Knight, honorable, passionate, and tragically vulnerable to influence. Kun seduced him with ideas of justice, twisted his grief, and forged him into a weapon. Together, they spread fear across the galaxy. But it wasn't enough. The Jedi regrouped. Qel-Droma broke under the weight of what he'd done and led the Jedi to Yavin 4. Kun knew defeat was inevitable, and so he betrayed the galaxy one last time. Rather than die, Kun performed a final ritual, one that ripped his soul from his body and anchored it to Yavin's great temple. He left his followers behind, left his war unfinished, and watched the jungle swallow the remnants of his empire. For 4,000 years his spirit waited, whispering to intruders, feeding on fear. His name vanished from history textbooks, his crimes reduced to myth. But the Massassi ruins remained. So did the pain. When Exar Kun reawakened in the time of Luke Skywalker's new Jedi Order, he did not return to fight. He returned to possess. He targeted the students again, young, eager, and unprepared. The same pattern repeated, the same rot. It took a collective act of will from the new Jedi to banish him for good, and even then the cost was high. Exar Kun didn't build a legacy. He built a graveyard. He turned students into tools, allies into batteries, and war into spectacle. His betrayal wasn't loud. It was slow, methodical, and personal. He fed on trust. He weaponized belief. And when it collapsed around him, he escaped responsibility and left the galaxy to deal with the wreckage. Even in death, he wanted to rule. Not as a body, but as a presence that could never be fully exorcised. The jungle grew over his temples, but his name still pulses beneath the soil. And those who study the dark side even now hear whispers when they pass through the ruins. He never left, not really. Darth Bane wasn't born into power. He earned it by crawling through corpses, sometimes literally. Before the name, he was Decil, a miner with nothing but rage. That rage caught the attention of the Sith, and in their academies, he thrived. Not because he was the strongest, but because he saw what others refused to see. The Sith weren't ascending. They were decaying. By the time Bane rose through the ranks, the Sith Order had become a bloated parody of itself. Dozens of lords shouting over each other, scheming for scraps, all while pretending to serve a unified brotherhood. The Jedi weren't even their biggest threat. The real danger sat across the table, sharpening knives with fake smiles. Bane watched these lords argue and posture while their forces dwindled. He saw the Sith's obsession with dominance had become cannibalism. They hoarded secrets, traded apprentices like credits, sent soldiers into suicidal battles just to outshine one another. So Bane made a decision, not to fix the Order, to erase it. He vanished from the battlefield and wandered into the depths of Sith history. On Lihon, in the ancient Rakatan temple, he uncovered knowledge older than the Jedi archives. There, he found the writings of Darth Revan and others who understood what the Sith had lost. Unity, as the Brotherhood defined it, was a lie. True strength required scarcity. Power needed focus. And trust. That was a vulnerability to be crushed. Bane returned to the Brotherhood with clarity and poison. He learned of a weapon, one so destructive it could annihilate armies and twist the Force itself. A thought bomb. Not a conventional weapon. It required willing participants, all strong in the Force, trapped in a feedback loop of energy. He didn't need to fight the other Lords. He just needed to let their arrogance kill them. He manipulated Lord Khan, the Brotherhood's leader, convincing him to use the thought bomb against the Jedi during the climactic Battle of Ruusan. Khan, eager for victory, agreed. When the ritual began, Bane walked away. The detonation vaporized every Sith and Jedi caught within it, tearing their souls into a void of endless torment. Bane didn't look back. From those ashes, he created the rule of two: one master, one apprentice. No armies, no councils, just a singular chain of inheritance. Power passed down through murder. The apprentice would learn everything the master knew, then surpass them. When ready, they would kill their teacher and take an apprentice of their own. It wasn't mentorship. It was a countdown. He chose Zannah as his first apprentice. A child touched by darkness, capable of cruelty without hesitation. He raised her not with affection, but with purpose. She studied Sith sorcery, deception, and psychological warfare. He taught her how to wait, how to smile while planning a kill, how to pretend loyalty until the exact moment betrayal became unavoidable. But Bane didn't train her only to be strong. He trained her to end him. He believed death at the hands of a more powerful successor was the final proof of his system. If he could not be killed, the rule of two had failed. So he pushed Zannah relentlessly, withholding praise, forcing her to struggle, to hate him, to outgrow him. Their relationship was a chess match with a body count. When the confrontation finally came, it wasn't glorious. It was brutal. Zannah crushed his bones, shattered his mind, and fought off his last gambit, a forbidden technique that would allow Bane's spirit to possess her body. Whether she truly defeated him or became his vessel is still debated. She walked away wearing her own face, but some who encountered her afterward claimed her voice had changed. What matters is that Bane's plans survived, and so did the cycle. His legacy wasn't a monument or a lineage of disciples. It was a philosophy built on structured treachery. Every Sith after him would carry the same burden: train your killer or die forgotten. That wasn't mentorship. That was slaughter disguised as tradition. Bane didn't betray the Sith to save them. He slaughtered them to refine them. And in doing so, he created an order where survival meant learning how to destroy the only person who ever taught you. That wasn't strength. That was design. Darth Zannah was a contradiction in motion. While other Sith clawed and screamed their way into power, she whispered her way to it. A girl once pulled from the ashes of war, taken by Darth Bane and molded into a living weapon, Zannah did what most Sith could not. She survived her master's expectations without ever giving him reason to strike first. She wore loyalty like armor, masking her ambitions beneath wide eyes and a quiet voice. From the outside, she appeared the perfect apprentice, obedient, respectful, patient. But in secret, she wandered paths Bane never showed her. She dug into the dark corners of Sith knowledge, ritual sorcery, mind-breaking illusions, ancient techniques most believed too dangerous to even document. She didn't just want power. She wanted something that couldn't be stolen with brute strength alone. For years, Bane waited for her to challenge him. He trained her to believe that the only way forward was through his death, and she understood this, but she delayed, waiting until she had something her master did not, an arsenal of the arcane. Bane believed in control through raw domination. Zannah sought to win with corruption and calculated fear. Their final confrontation was inevitable. When it came, it was brutal. Bane, in his declining years, had begun studying a forbidden technique that would allow him to transfer his essence into another body, essentially possessing them, leaving death behind. He intended to use it on Zannah if she proved too powerful to kill by blade. She, in turn, came prepared. The duel tore through stone and bone. Bane's physical strength was unmatched, but Zannah didn't meet him with resistance. She met him with madness. She flooded his mind with illusions, fracturing his thoughts, twisting his memories, forcing his rage to turn inward. And still, he pressed on. When the battle ended, only one figure stood. But what remained was not clarity. Zannah walked away, victorious. Her body bore the scars of the duel. Her hand twitched with unnatural spasms, just as Bane's had during moments of deep rage. Her voice grew colder, her posture sharper. When questioned by her new apprentice, she answered with cryptic assurance, "I am Darth Zannah. Bane is dead." But was he? That question split Sith scholars for generations. Some believed she had indeed killed him and assumed her rightful place. Others suspected that Bane had succeeded in possessing her body, hiding beneath her skin, speaking with her voice, steering her legacy from behind her eyes. The evidence was thin, but unsettling. Her behavior shifted. She stopped speaking of certain teachings. Her mannerisms reflected Bane's speech patterns, and she never allowed herself to be probed through the Force. This uncertainty fractured future Sith lines. One faction treated Zannah as a symbol of adaptation, proof that guile and sorcery could overcome brute strength. Another claimed she was a puppet, her line nothing more than an extension of Bane's will in a new shell. The rule of two survived, but its foundation cracked. Each generation that followed had to decide whether they served Bane's vision or Zannah's deviation. And Zannah never clarified it. She left no holocrons, no written records, only whispers passed down through apprentices. Her silence became her final weapon. By refusing to confirm or deny the truth, she ensured no one could claim her throne with certainty. No Sith after her could stand on a pure legacy. Every heir operated under suspicion. This wasn't hesitation, it was control. Zannah understood that truth, in the hands of the Sith, was a weakness. Certainty bred complacency. Doubt kept apprentices wary, always watching, never trusting. She didn't want worship. She wanted obedience grounded in fear and mystery. The very ambiguity of her victory protected her more effectively than any fortress ever could. Her reign lasted decades, quiet, methodical, lethal when required. She chose her successor with care, trained them with intensity, and always kept them guessing. No matter how powerful they became, they could never be sure they were strong enough. Because Zannah had rewritten the final rule. It wasn't just about killing the master. It was about knowing what waited inside them. When she finally vanished, there was no funeral, no monument, only more questions. Some say her apprentice betrayed her. Others think she chose to disappear. The truth remains buried, like her body, if one was ever left behind. What remains is the echo of a lie so well told, even the Sith still argue about it. Zannah's story didn't end with victory or death. It ended with doubt, and for her, that was the sharpest weapon of all. Darth Cognus came from the shadows, and she stayed there. Once an assassin known as the Huntress, she was a seer, a tracker who didn't just follow her targets through space, but through the Force itself. She could sense hesitation like a scent, doubt like heat. Zannah chose her for that precision, but also for something darker. Cognus didn't crave power loudly. She waited, watched, then struck with clinical certainty. And from the moment she took the Sith mantle, she rewrote the meaning of control. Unlike Bane or Zannah, Cognus didn't train one apprentice. She trained two, one publicly, one privately, and she made sure each knew the other existed. She didn't want loyalty, she wanted conflict, because in conflict, secrets spill. She told each of them different lies, fed them opposing lessons, and waited to see who would betray the other first. The Sith Code had always praised strength, but Cognus twisted that idea further. Strength wasn't just in domination, it was in information. Her Sith Order wasn't built on mentorship. It resembled espionage. Every interaction was a test, every lesson a riddle. And while she adhered to the rule of two in structure, she broke it constantly in spirit. Apprentices came and went, some vanishing without ever being declared defeated. She played them against each other, orchestrated feuds that ended in sudden disappearances, and never once admitted fault. Even those closest to her could never tell if they were being groomed for power or prepared for disposal. She encouraged her acolytes to spy on one another, not out of paranoia, but as a training exercise. She believed treachery was a skill, not a risk. She'd stage false missions, feed forged intelligence, then watch how her apprentices handled betrayal when it came from someone they trusted. Some passed, most didn't. And she never trusted them entirely. She never trusted anyone. Cognus moved her operations constantly, from forgotten Sith tombs on remote moons to abandoned space stations in wild space. No central base, no archives, no trail. Her legacy wasn't recorded, it was whispered. 1,000 rumors, no holocrons survived. If she created any, she took them with her into the void. What little is known of her tactics comes from intercepted communications, encrypted journals later cracked by Jedi code breakers, and the words of one apprentice who defected, only to vanish weeks later under circumstances that suggested anything but coincidence. Some Sith Lords believed Cognus saw the future. Others thought she simply prepared for every possibility. What can be confirmed is that her presence destabilized the remnants of the Republic intelligence network. Even decades after her death, agents found themselves hunting threats she had planted, traps that had waited years to spring. Her end came without warning. No duel, no coup, no declaration. During a rare planetary eclipse above a dead system on the outer rim, her ship was found adrift, lifeless. No sign of attack, no body, just silence. The few Sith who followed afterward treated her death with suspicion, not grief. Some believed she had faked it. Others claimed she had transferred her consciousness elsewhere, mimicking Bane's forbidden technique. Whatever the truth, her disappearance didn't clarify anything. It multiplied questions. Cognus left no formal successor. Her apprentices were either dead, missing, or too fractured to step forward. One tried and was promptly killed by another. The Sith Order, now fully subterranean, lost contact with itself for years. Individual cells operated in isolation, guided only by fragments of her teaching. She hadn't built an empire. She'd built a labyrinth, and then she vanished inside it. In many ways, that was the point. She didn't want a statue. She didn't need a legacy engraved on a wall. Her power came from knowing things no one else did, and making sure they never figured them out. Her rule of two wasn't a hierarchy. It was a cycle of paranoia. And once she was gone, the Order became a guessing game. Even the Sith who claimed to descend from her line did so cautiously, afraid of revealing too much. Because if she was still alive, if any of her agents remained active, then declaring yourself her heir might be the last thing you ever said. Darth Cognus didn't teach power. She taught survival. And for her, survival meant vanishing so completely that even those who lived in the dark were forced to blink. Darth Tenebrous wasn't driven by emotion. Where others thrived on rage or hatred, he placed his faith in probabilities. A master of Sith science and predictive modeling, Tenebrous believed that destiny could be bent, not through the Force alone, but through mathematics. He calculated timelines, manipulated genetic outcomes, and modeled possible futures like equations to be solved. Everything, down to his own death, was part of an intricate formula. He saw the rule of two not as a tradition, but as a system to be gamed. So when he selected his apprentice, Darth Plagueis, he didn't pick someone loyal. He chose someone ambitious enough to kill him. That was the point. His grand design required his own murder, carried out at a moment he had orchestrated years in advance. Tenebrous believed that by predicting and controlling his apprentice's choices, he could achieve what no Sith had before: consciousness after death, tethered not to the Force, but to biology. Tenebrous secretly developed a parasitic technique, an unnatural survival method allowing him to embed fragments of his essence within a host at the moment of death. The idea wasn't spiritual, it was anatomical. He trained Plagueis while simultaneously infecting him with a living tether buried deep within his cells. From that moment, Tenebrous wasn't just a teacher, he was a hidden passenger. But his plan didn't stop there. Tenebrous cloned himself repeatedly, creating potential vessels for his eventual return. These weren't mere copies. They were optimized, genetically enhanced, designed for longevity and force sensitivity. But he sabotaged each one, ensuring none could function independently. They were fail-safes, not heirs. When the day came, Plagueis killed him, just as Tenebrous had foreseen. Struck down in a cave, his final breath carried a sense of triumph, not defeat. The trap had sprung. As Plagueis stood over his master's corpse, Tenebrous activated the tether. His consciousness flooded into the apprentice's mind. But something went wrong. He didn't take control. He couldn't. Instead, he became a voice in the dark, a phantom whisper buried beneath layers of thought. He could see Plagueis's choices unfold, could taste the shape of his reasoning, but couldn't act. Tenebrous had designed a perfect prison, clever, precise, inescapable, and locked himself inside it. Still, he waited. Plagueis, brilliant and obsessed in his own right, remained unaware of his master's presence for years. Tenebrous observed his experiments with midichlorians, his manipulation of life and death, his political maneuvering. But there was no gratitude, only contempt. Tenebrous didn't see his apprentice's work as evolution. He saw it as squandered potential. He began trying to influence dreams, distort memories, nudge instincts, subtle things, a hesitation, a doubt, a whisper before sleep. But Plagueis resisted. Whether by will or accident, he maintained control. Tenebrous found himself stuck, an architect who'd been sealed behind his own blueprint. It wasn't just a betrayal of Plagueis, it was a betrayal of life itself. Tenebrous treated existence like a machine to be disassembled and rebuilt. He had no reverence for nature, no interest in the Force's mysteries. To him, the dark side was not a current to be followed, it was a tool to be repurposed. Even death, the final boundary for most Sith, was simply an equation to be rewritten. And yet, for all his planning, he made one fatal miscalculation. Plagueis did not break. He didn't spiral into madness. He didn't unravel, he grew stronger. Tenebrous had hoped to use that growth as a signal, to awaken, to override, to possess. But Plagueis' mind remained locked, too deeply rooted in his own vision to be overtaken. As time passed, Tenebrous' voice faded, not erased, trapped. The parasite he'd unleashed began to decay, buried beneath ambition and secrecy. He was left drifting in fragments, unable to scream. His clones, left in hidden chambers across the galaxy, never activated. One was lost to a volcanic eruption, another stolen by smugglers and dissected in a lab that never understood what it had found. A third vanished entirely. There was no resurrection, just silence. Tenebrous gambled everything on control and lost control of everything. His apprentice flourished without him. His legacy became a whisper, often overshadowed by the name that followed. Plagueis the Wise. To those who still study Tenebrous' lineage, he's remembered not for his brilliance, but for the chilling clarity of his mistake. He thought death was just another step in a process. He forgot that even parasites need something living to cling to. Darth Plagueis understood patience. While most Sith sought power through war or politics, he chose economics. He embedded himself in the galaxy's financial heart, pulling strings no blaster could reach. Through the Moon Intergalactic Banking Clan, he influenced galactic markets, crashed star systems, and financed governments that unknowingly advanced Sith control. He didn't need a throne, he bought one. But money was just scaffolding. His true obsession was death, not defeating it in combat, erasing it. Plagueis believed the Force could be conditioned, like a living organism. If midichlorians carried life, then he would command them. He wanted to create life without reproduction, resurrect the dead, and perfect immortality through biology, not mysticism. He ran experiments in hidden laboratories, some on himself, many on unwilling subjects. Creatures were grown, mutated, destroyed. Entire species were pushed to extinction by accident. He rarely spoke of the rule of two. It was an obligation, not a principle. He believed the cycle of master and apprentice was inefficient. His goal wasn't succession, it was permanence. If he succeeded, he wouldn't need an heir. Still, he followed tradition, at least on the surface. He took an apprentice, a charismatic, intelligent human who called himself Palpatine. To the galaxy, he was a senator from Naboo. To Plagueis, he was a vessel, sharp enough to assist, but ultimately disposable. He trained him in secrecy, feeding him knowledge while keeping the most valuable truths locked away. Plagueis lied constantly about his intentions, about the limits of their power, about what he had truly discovered. He told Sidious he had nearly mastered the ability to manipulate life itself, implying, but never confirming, that he had created him. That suggestion lodged in Sidious's mind like a splinter. It was never removed. Their relationship stretched the rule of two to the edge. Sidious gained influence in the Republic Senate, while Plagueis hid in the shadows, controlling resources and erasing evidence. Together, they engineered the collapse of the Galactic Republic. But Sidious wasn't content with power shared. He watched. He waited. What he saw disturbed him. Plagueis had begun seeking ways to survive permanently, not in spirit, not through possession, but in his own body. He believed he could reach a point where death was optional. Sidious realized he was being groomed as a tool, not as a future lord. The rule of two required conflict. Plagueis had abandoned that rule. He underestimated the very doctrine that had birthed him. So Sidious made a choice. He didn't confront his master in open battle. He waited until Plagueis had drunk too much wine, celebrating the successful nomination of Naboo's senator for Supreme Chancellor. Sidious smiled, listened, toasted with him. then used the Force to hold him down and electrocute him, slowly, methodically, over hours. Plagueis never fought back. That was the tragedy. He didn't think he had to. He believed Sidious wouldn't dare. His arrogance blinded him. And in those final moments, the man who had tried to master death was too shocked to resist it. His death left a void, not just in the Sith Order, but in the Force itself. Some believed his final experiments with midichlorians triggered a shift, one that would later manifest in the creation of Anakin Skywalker. Others believed it was Sidious who tampered with life afterward, using Plagueis' stolen research. The truth remains buried. Plagueis didn't leave a holocron. He didn't preserve his findings. He didn't want anyone completing his work, not even his apprentice. His betrayal of Sidious was subtle, hoarding power while pretending to share it. Sidious's betrayal was simpler, a knife to the heart, delivered while the victim slept. In the end, Plagueis didn't lose to the Jedi or to time. He lost to the one thing he refused to anticipate: trust. He placed faith in someone trained to kill him and then chose comfort over vigilance. The dark side favors ambition. Plagueis forgot that. And for that mistake, he became a cautionary tale whispered by Sith who dared to get comfortable. Darth Sidious didn't just master the Sith doctrine, he manipulated it until it meant nothing. The Rule of Two, designed to limit and refine Sith power, became his playground. He learned from Darth Plagueis how to hide in plain sight, how to twist institutions from within, how to corrode a republic without lifting a saber. But Sidious wasn't content with subtlety. He used deception like a hammer, and everyone who followed him paid the price. He began with Plagueis, praised him, served him, learned from him, then killed him without warning. The moment his master became a liability, Sidious struck, not out of rage, but calculation. That same strategy defined his rule. When Darth Maul fulfilled his purpose as a weapon, he was sent into a duel he wasn't expected to survive. Maul did survive, but Sidious had already moved on. Count Dooku was next, a political puppet disguised as a partner. Sidious fed him just enough truth to keep him useful, enough anger to fuel his defection, enough mystery to keep him off balance. Dooku believed he was part of a grand Sith plan to reform the galaxy. Instead, he was bait. Sidious offered him to Anakin Skywalker like a ritual sacrifice, and when the Jedi hesitated, Sidious whispered, "Do it." The execution of Tyrannus wasn't a betrayal to Sidious. It was a necessity, a controlled elimination. Then came Vader, a project, a prize, the broken remains of Anakin Skywalker twisted into a Sith enforcer. Sidious didn't mourn what was lost, he reshaped it. Vader's pain, his guilt, his fury, they were features, not flaws. And yet Sidious never truly trusted him, not completely. He fed Vader half-truths, kept secrets from him, and lied about Padme's death to control him. Vader wasn't a successor, he was a leash. Every apprentice Sidious trained was disposable. Every alliance he formed, temporary. He didn't build an empire of trust, he built one of obedience. And when the Rule of Two became inconvenient, he discarded it entirely. While Vader limped across battlefields, Sidious worked in secret on Exegol, developing cloning technology, resurrecting ancient Sith rituals, and preparing vessels for his consciousness. Dozens of backup plans, dozens of possible bodies. He wasn't planning for a worthy apprentice. He was planning for no apprentice at all. The Rule of Two had become a lie, maintained for show. Sidious saw himself not as part of a lineage, but as its endpoint. His obsession with immortality pushed him into experiments far more grotesque than Plagueis ever attempted. Strandcasts, force-imbued monstrosities, failures locked in laboratories deep underground. He called it contingency, but it was desperation. He had defeated the Jedi, destroyed the Republic, and bent the galaxy to his will. Yet it wasn't enough. He couldn't let go. That was the heart of his spiral. Sidious betrayed others so frequently, so completely, that he never noticed when he turned on himself. His reliance on Vader sowed the seeds of rebellion. His arrogance blinded him to Luke Skywalker's potential. He underestimated attachment, ironically, the very flaw he once weaponized to destroy the Jedi. When Vader rose to defend his son and threw Sidious into the reactor shaft, the Empire's spine broke in seconds. But Sidious didn't stay dead. His final betrayal came after death, when fragments of his essence clung to life and transferred into a decaying clone. What remained was a shadow, powerful but warped. He clung to technology, to dark science, to an artificial shell that could barely contain his hatred. He lived, but not as a man. As a reminder of what happens when a Sith refuses to accept the end. His followers tried to continue his legacy. Cultists and generals rebranded the Empire, but it wasn't fear of the Sith that kept them loyal. It was fear of his return. Sidious's presence loomed over the First Order like a curse. His contingency plans, Operation Cinder, Project Resurrection, the Final Order, outlived the Sith teachings themselves. What he built endured, but it lacked soul. He had betrayed the Sith ideal, turned the rule of two into a cover for one man's obsession. His vision consumed everything, yet left nothing intact. No stable line of succession, no future. Darth Sidious wasn't just a deceiver. He was deception given form, and in the end, the only thing he couldn't manipulate was time. Darth Maul was never meant to rule. He wasn't raised with ambition or legacy in mind. He was bred to serve. From childhood, Maul was shaped by Darth Sidious to be a living blade, loyal, brutal, and disposable. While the galaxy believed Sidious followed the rule of two, Maul was a secret, a contingency tucked away on Mustafar and trained in the art of pure aggression. No politics, no grand plan, just kill on command. And he delivered. During the Battle of Naboo, Maul revealed himself to the Jedi as something they hadn't seen in a millennium, a true Sith. His duel with Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi became the opening shot of a larger war. But for Maul, it ended in silence, bisected, presumed dead, and forgotten by his master without hesitation. But Maul didn't die. He fell, and he kept falling, into madness, into isolation, into the cold heart of the Force. Surviving through sheer hate, he was reduced to a feral creature, his mind fractured, his body replaced with scavenged legs, hiding in the trash worlds of the galaxy. His resurrection wasn't a miracle, it was a consequence. Hate like Maul's doesn't vanish. It waits. When his brother, Savage Opress, found him years later, Maul was a ghost, half-mad, fueled by vengeance, obsessed with one thing, destroying Obi-Wan Kenobi. But beneath that obsession was a darker realization. Maul understood that Sidious had never intended for him to succeed. He was a tool, nothing more. His loyalty had been a leash, and the moment he failed, he was cut loose. So Maul made his own path. He built a criminal empire, the Shadow Collective. He united Mandalorians, Black Sun syndicates, the Pike families, even remnants of Death Watch. He didn't wear the title of Sith anymore. He didn't need it. He wanted power, yes, but also revenge, not just against the Jedi, but against Sidious himself. To take Mandalore, Maul orchestrated a violent coup, manipulating political unrest and killing Duchess Satine Kryze in front of Obi-Wan's eyes. It wasn't strategy, it was cruelty, a message. Maul didn't want to beat Kenobi, he wanted to break him, but victory came with a cost. Sidious returned, not as a mentor, but as a predator. Sidious didn't see Maul's rise as a threat to galactic dominance. He saw it as an insult. In one swift attack, he cut down Savage and captured Maul, not to destroy him, but to remind him who still held the chains. Even after escaping, Maul's plans began to unravel. He wasn't a true Sith anymore, but he couldn't become something else either. He betrayed the Sith teachings, rejected the rule of two, and ultimately betrayed his own brother. He had told Savage they were equals, that they would change everything. But Maul kept secrets, withheld knowledge, and when it mattered most, failed to protect him. Savage died a pawn, just like Maul had been. Despite everything, Maul endured. He resurfaced during the Clone Wars and later, during the early years of the Empire. He posed as a hermit, rebranded himself as a merchant of knowledge, and tried to manipulate Ezra Bridger into becoming his new apprentice. He saw potential in Ezra, not as a student, but as a means to resurrect the power he once had. But Maul had changed. The fire hadn't gone out, but it flickered. He was no longer a Sith, no longer anyone's apprentice, not a Jedi, not a master, just a scar with a name. In his final days, Maul tracked Obi-Wan Kenobi across the sands of Tatooine. When they met again, it was not a grand duel. It was short, honest. Maul struck first and fell. Dying in Kenobi's arms, he didn't curse him. He asked a question: is he the chosen one? Not out of hope, but out of resignation. He needed to believe someone could finish what he couldn't. Maul's story didn't end in vengeance. It ended in recognition. He had chased revenge, built empires, betrayed allies, and survived death, yet he accomplished nothing lasting. No Sith throne, no galactic conquest, just ruins behind him and a grave ahead. He wasn't Sidious' apprentice. He wasn't a Sith Lord. He was the leftover piece that never fit the board. And when the dust settled, Maul didn't win. He endured long enough to realize he'd been used, and then discarded again. Count Dooku was never corrupted by chaos. He walked away from the Jedi Order with his dignity intact, and a mind sharpened by disillusionment, not anger. Unlike many Sith before him, he didn't fall. He chose to leave. He saw the Republic as bloated, the Jedi as blind, and the galaxy as something that needed order, not faith. His betrayal wasn't born in fire. It was measured, reasoned, and deliberate. But Dooku didn't leap into the dark side. He stepped into it, slowly, cautiously. He took on the title of Darth Tyrannus and became Sidious's apprentice, but he never considered himself a servant. He viewed Sidious as a necessary alliance, not a superior. In Dooku's mind, they were equals, or at least they would be until the time came to replace him. He planned for it, even as he followed orders. He believed he could shape the Sith into something more refined, less monstrous. He believed the darkness could be civilized. That arrogance shaped everything that followed. As the figurehead of the separatist movement, Dooku presented himself as a liberator. He promised freedom from Republic corruption, painted the Jedi as political pawns, and cloaked the war in rhetoric about sovereignty and justice. But it was all misdirection. He never intended to give his allies victory. The Confederacy was always a tool, a means to destabilize the Republic so Sidious could take control, and Dooku could seize the reins after. He lied to everyone, to planetary leaders promising peace, to warriors promising glory, to the Jedi offering backdoor deals. He crafted the Clone Wars not just as a political conflict, but as a cleansing fire, one that would burn away weakness on both sides. But Sidious didn't share his vision. He saw Dooku as a placeholder, a thread to be cut when a better apprentice emerged. That moment arrived on a separatist cruiser above Coruscant. Captured deliberately, Dooku was placed in front of Anakin Skywalker. The plan was supposed to test the young Jedi. Sidious encouraged it, playing both roles, Chancellor and Sith Lord. Then, with the slightest nod, he gave the order, "Kill him." Dooku didn't resist. He blinked, shocked. Not that he was going to die, but that it came from Sidious himself. In that final moment, he understood the joke. All the speeches, all the strategies, all the visions, none of them mattered. He wasn't a partner, he was a stepping stone. Anakin's lightsabers crossed and Dooku's head fell. His death wasn't theatrical, it was surgical. A clean betrayal from the very master he had planned to overthrow. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had trained Grievous, commissioned the clone army, dismantled entire star systems, and in the end, he didn't even get a final word. But his legacy didn't die with him. Dooku left a trail of fragments behind. Jedi who sympathized with his critique of the Order. Separatists who continued to resist long after the war ended. And recordings, some recovered, others erased, hinting at the depth of his manipulation. Not all of it was clean. Some of it bordered on madness. He had tried to balance too many lies. At some point, the truths he told himself began to unravel. He believed in a refined dark side, but he still trained assassins. He claimed to fight for peace, but engineered war. He spoke of clarity, yet cloaked every move in layers of deceit. Eventually, no one knew where the truth ended and the mask began. Even among Sith historians, Dooku remains difficult to categorize. Was he a reformer who lost his way? A radical who mistook calculation for control? Or simply another narcissist who thought he could bend the dark side to fit a noble shape? What is certain is this: Dooku was betrayed because he forgot the first rule of the Sith. No one shares power. Not for long. He thought he could outwit it. That by playing every side he could eventually claim them all. But the Sith don't reward balance. They consume it. And Dooku, for all his intellect, all his refinement, died as just another example of what happens when a Sith plays by someone else's rules. Asajj Ventress was never meant to rise. Her life began in chaos, stolen from her Dathomirian clan and thrown into the hands of a criminal warlord. She was saved by a Jedi, then lost him to death and betrayal. That pattern, salvation followed by abandonment, would shape her forever. When Count Dooku found her, she was broken but not hollow. He molded her into something sharp. Not an apprentice, not officially. Just an assassin, useful, expendable and loyal, as long as he needed her. Dooku trained her in the ways of the Sith while pretending she wasn't truly Sith. It allowed him to skirt the rule of two. She wielded red blades. She spoke the code. But she wasn't part of the Order. Not really. She was a loophole with a heartbeat, and she served well. Through war, espionage, and sabotage, Ventress earned her place at Dooku's side. She killed Jedi. She commanded droid legions. She bled for the Confederacy. But it was never enough. When Darth Sidious learned of her growing strength, he grew concerned. Two Sith, one too many blades. Ventress was becoming a liability. Sidious ordered her eliminated. Dooku obeyed. No warning, no trial. Just a lightsaber through trust. Ventress barely survived the assassination attempt. Burned, betrayed, and hunted, she returned to the only place that had ever felt like home, Dathomir. The Night Sisters took her in. Unlike the Sith, they understood pain wasn't weakness. It was currency. Mother Talzin helped her recover, then helped her plot revenge. Together they created Savage Opress, a monstrous warrior meant to infiltrate Dooku's court and destroy him from within. But revenge proved slippery. Opress turned out to be unstable. Dooku survived. The plan collapsed. The Night Sisters paid the price. Grievous and the Separatists razed their world. Most of the clan was exterminated. Ventress was alone again. She drifted, a mercenary, a hunter, a survivor. Her anger never vanished, but her purpose did. The Sith had used her. The Jedi had failed her. The Night Sisters were ashes. She found work among bounty hunters, occasionally crossing paths with former enemies. Her edge remained, but her cause had dulled. She wasn't trying to win anymore. Just endure. Then came Quinlan Vos, a Jedi. Determined, stubborn, compassionate. The Council sent him to assassinate Dooku, and they believed only one person could help him navigate the dark, the one who knew Dooku best, Ventress. At first she tolerated him, then she taught him, then she trusted him. And for the first time in her life, she let herself believe in something more than war. They fell in love, awkwardly, fiercely, and against every rule. But Vos faltered. The mission took him too deep into the dark. He turned on her, sided with Dooku, betrayed her, just like the others. Yet unlike the Sith, Vos came back, broken, ashamed, but willing to face her. Ventress didn't run. She forgave him. She didn't get a second chance. In the final confrontation, Dooku struck with lightning meant for Vos. Ventress intercepted it, her body absorbing every volt. No words, no grand farewell. She collapsed in his arms and died there, not as an assassin, not as a Night Sister, not as a Sith experiment, just Asajj. Her sacrifice saved the man who once betrayed her. It was the one act of selflessness she never learned from the Sith. It didn't redeem her. It didn't erase the blood. But it showed what the Sith could never understand, that there is strength in choosing others before yourself. She left behind no apprentice, no legacy of power. Her name wasn't passed on through Sith holocrons or Jedi scrolls, but she mattered, because she broke the cycle. She didn't kill her master. She didn't seek domination. She walked away. Ventress's story ended not in rage, but in choice. A rare ending for someone shaped by so much darkness. One final betrayal, hers, against the fate the Sith had written for her. Savage Opress didn't rise through ambition. He was sculpted. The Night Sisters twisted his body, buried his fear, and burned away the softness that made him a person. What remained was a monster with a pulse, bred not to lead, not to think, but to kill. He was never meant to question his orders. He was a tool, one that could roar, crush, destroy, but never decide. His first purpose was revenge. Ventress wanted Dooku dead. Savage was the blade meant to deliver that message. He infiltrated Dooku's court under false pretense, played the obedient assassin, then turned on his master in a failed coup. It didn't matter. The plan fell apart, and Savage didn't return in shame. He returned changed. He didn't care about Dooku, or the Night Sisters, or the Sith. He needed direction. Without someone to follow, he was empty. So when whispers of a lost brother reached him, Darth Maul, long thought dead, Savage followed those echoes into the deepest corners of the galaxy. He found Maul shattered, crawling through garbage and madness. And in that wreckage, he saw something familiar, a monster who had survived. Savage helped Maul rebuild, not just physically but politically. Together they struck at the Jedi. They took Mandalore. They rallied criminal empires. For a moment, it looked like Savage had found purpose beyond violence. A brother, a war, a throne. But that was never truly his to claim. Maul was always the mind behind the blade. Savage followed orders just as blindly as before, only now they came from blood. He crushed skulls and threw Jedi across battlefields, but he didn't lead. He didn't plan. He didn't question. Maul saw him as family, yes, but also as leverage, muscle, intimidation. And then came Sidious. When the Dark Lord of the Sith descended upon Mandalore, he didn't bring an army. He didn't need one. He came for Maul, but Savage stood in the way. For the first time, the weapon thought he was a shield. He tried to protect his brother. He lasted minutes. Sidious toyed with him, mocked him, humiliated him. He tore through Savage's defenses with one hand and broke his body with the other. Savage cried out, not in fear, not in defiance, in confusion. He didn't understand why the strength he had been given wasn't enough. His last words weren't poetic. He collapsed in a throne room that had never belonged to him, gasping as his body unraveled, the Night Sister magic failing, his form shrinking back into something closer to the man he once was. Maul held him, and Savage, for once, asked nothing. He just died. His legacy wasn't one of betrayal. It was one of exploitation. Every group he served used him. The Night Sisters manipulated his genes and mind. Dooku discarded him when his usefulness expired. Ventress never saw him as anything more than a pawn in her revenge. Maul loved him, but still used him as a hammer. Even Mandalore, conquered in their name, treated him as a terror, not a ruler. Savage never betrayed anyone. He was loyal, to a fault. And in a galaxy where Sith power is defined by calculated treachery, that loyalty made him irrelevant. No long game, no ambition, just orders, shouted or whispered. He didn't shape the galaxy. He didn't destroy an order. He didn't twist the Force to his will. He swung the blade and bled for causes he never chose. Some Sith die with legacies, others with empires. Savage Opress died with nothing, no doctrine, no heir, no purpose. Just silence, broken by the hum of a lightsaber too elegant for the life it ended. Long before he became Darth Krayt, he was a Sharad Het, a Jedi Knight raised among the sandstorms and savagery of Tatooine. Born into the warrior code of the Tusken Raiders and trained in the ways of the Force, Het embodied two worlds, but neither saved him from what the Clone Wars revealed. After Order 66, he vanished into exile, and in that silence, the Jedi within him began to rot. His fall wasn't immediate. It came in fragments. First, disillusionment with the Republic, then disgust with the Jedi's failure to prevent its collapse. When he wandered into Sith space, already wounded and bitter, he encountered the teachings of the ancient Sith Lords. They offered something the Jedi never could: permanence, not peace, not balance, power that refused to fade. And so a Sharad Het died. In his place rose Darth Krayt. Unlike Bane, Krayt had no interest in purity. He didn't inherit the rule of two. He rejected it. He believed that the Sith tradition, with its endless succession of backstabbing, was flawed beyond repair. Instead, he created the one Sith. Not a hierarchy, but a hive. Countless Sith under one vision. His vision. Loyalty was enforced by pain. Individual ambition was crushed beneath unity. To Krayt, obedience wasn't weakness. It was survival. But beneath that cold exterior pulsed a single obsession: cheating death. He had learned that power meant nothing if your body gave out, so he experimented. He cloned himself. He placed himself in stasis chambers guarded by monsters and rituals. He fused Yuuzhan Vong biotech into his armor, hoping it would slow the decay. His skin twisted, his bones warped. But he endured. Not because the Force demanded it, because he refused to die. And for a while, it worked. Krayt conquered the galaxy. The Galactic Alliance collapsed. The Jedi were scattered. His one Sith dominated the stars through fear and overwhelming numbers. He ruled not through charisma, but through inevitability. Resistance didn't feel noble. It felt doomed. But decay doesn't respect fear. As Krayt's body weakened, so did his grip on his empire. The one Sith, built on unity, began fracturing. His most trusted followers, Darth Wylock, Darth Nihil, began preparing for his fall. They spoke of succession. Some plotted, others waited. When Crate finally succumbed to his injuries, Wylock betrayed him. Without ceremony, no duel, just the quiet removal of a dying tyrant. Yet Crate's death was a delay. Through dark science and sheer will, he returned. Reborn in a stronger clone, purged of the corruption that had infected his flesh, he emerged more powerful than before. But something had changed. The throne was colder, his followers more silent. They had obeyed because they feared his power. Now they feared his return even more. He had proven that death could be beaten, but not mistrust. Crate crushed the traitors. He reasserted dominance. But the one Sith was never the same. The order that once seemed unstoppable had revealed its flaw. Without faith, power is just weight, heavy, brittle, and always at risk of collapsing under its own pressure. He continued his campaign, faced Cade Skywalker, descendant of the Jedi legacy, saw visions of chaos beyond the veil. He spoke of something darker than the dark side itself, the threat of Force entropy. But by then, his words rang hollow. He had become what the Sith were always destined to be, a tyrant haunted by his own methods. Crate's final end came in battle, not from disease, not from age. A duel, brutal and sudden. He was killed by the very bloodline he had tried to erase. He didn't fade like a ghost or ascend like myth. He fell like a wall collapsing on itself. His Sith empire didn't last. His one Sith fractured into cults and fugitives. His teachings were lost, not buried. No apprentice carried his banner forward. His legacy was in ruins before his body hit the floor. Darth Crate didn't die because he was weak. He died because he feared being weak. And in the end, fear made him predictable. His desire to control death consumed every ounce of life around him. He wanted to be the future of the Sith. Instead, he became a warning. Malachor wasn't always dead. Before the Jedi forbade its name and before it was buried beneath layers of myth, it was a fortress world, chosen by a rogue circle of Sith lords who wanted to build something catastrophic. They were exiles, outcasts from Sith orders long since shattered, united by a single vision, a weapon so powerful it would silence all resistance, Jedi and Sith alike. The structure they forged was part temple, part superweapon. Its centerpiece was a battle station fused with ancient Sith alchemy and a massive kyber crystal. It could channel the Force itself, turning raw energy into focused destruction. They believed it would end the wars, not with diplomacy, with annihilation, but cooperation among Sith never lasts. As construction neared completion, paranoia bloomed. Each lord feared the others would activate the weapon first. Whispers turned to accusations. Swords left their sheaths. Rituals meant to bind loyalty became traps. The Sith turned on one another, not over ideology, but over timing. Who would claim the weapon, and who would become part of its ashes? The betrayal was swift. One of them activated the superweapon before the others could stop it. But it didn't fire. Instead, it froze. The dark energy spiraled out of control, locking the battlefield around it in stasis. The weapon never discharged, but it consumed everything in its reach. Time collapsed. Bodies stood locked, mid-scream. Lightsabers frozen in motion. A moment stretched endlessly, cursed to repeat in silence. The galaxy moved on. Malachor became legend. A forbidden place no one dared approach. Not because of radiation, because of what lingered, an unnatural stillness, untouched by time. Centuries later, Ezra Bridger arrived. What he found was not ruins. It was a monument of silence. The battlefield was intact. Sith statues loomed cracked but unbowed. A massive chasm led into the heart of the weapon, and along the stone pathways, corpses still held their stances, cloaked, armed, frozen. Ezra walked among them, realizing each body was a story. Some had fallen with blades in their backs. Others struck each other down face to face. These weren't soldiers, they were rivals. Their final expressions weren't pained, they were betrayed. No two died the same way. That was the tell. There had been no unifying moment of defiance or heroism, just chaos. The deeper he went, the more he understood. This wasn't just a failed weapon, it was a failed empire. These Sith weren't killed by Jedi. They were killed by each other, because no one trusted the other to share power, because betrayal was assumed, because fear moved faster than loyalty ever could. Even the central chamber, built to house the weapon's controls, bore signs of conflict. Claw marks on the console, scorch burns from infighting. An ancient holocron sat untouched, cracked, but still humming with stored knowledge. And above it all, an echo. Not a ghost, not a spirit, a residue. The Force itself recoiled from the room. Darth Maul, too, found his way to Malachor. He called it a place of power, but it was more than that. It was familiar. To Maul, shaped by betrayal and broken loyalties, Malachor wasn't a ruin. It was a mirror. He saw the pattern, repeated across generations. The Sith do not die in combat with Jedi. They die turning on each other. Ezra, inexperienced but perceptive, sensed the same truth. The temptation was there. Power, still intact, waiting for a hand bold or foolish enough to activate it. But the lesson was carved into every stone. Power taken from a Sith does not come with wisdom. It comes with a price. Malachor became a warning, not just about weapons, about ideology. These Sith had all the knowledge, all the might, but not one of them could trust the other long enough to see their plan realized. The weapon didn't fail. The Sith did. They didn't lose to a superior army or a smarter enemy. They lost to a truth older than the Jedi Code. No one rules forever when everyone is plotting. Malachor's silence wasn't peaceful. It was judgment. A battlefield held in place not by physics, but by consequence. And in that stillness, the Sith left behind the loudest betrayal of all, not against their enemies, but against their own future. The Inquisitorius wasn't built on trust. It was built on fear, forged in secrecy, and sustained by pain. Its members were not trained in the dark side from birth. They were broken into it. Most had once been Jedi, survivors of Order 66. Padawans pulled from the wreckage of a fallen order. The Empire didn't destroy them outright. It twisted them. Sidious and Vader didn't offer these former Jedi salvation. They offered a second life on a leash. Torture, isolation, and ritual stripped away their loyalty. What replaced it wasn't devotion to the Sith, but terror of disobedience. They weren't taught the full Sith path. They were reshaped as weapons, hunters of their own kind. Their names were erased. No heritage, no lineage. They became numbers, the second sister, the fifth brother, the ninth sister. Each title stripped them of identity, reduced them to function. Within the Inquisitorius, legacy didn't matter, only results. At the center of it all stood Darth Vader. He was both commander and executioner. He offered no mentorship, no camaraderie, no recognition of shared pain. His presence alone reminded them what failure looked like. Many Inquisitors feared him more than the Jedi they were sent to hunt. And that fear was intentional. Vader ensured that none would rise too far. None would grow too bold. Each Inquisitor operated knowing they were disposable. The Grand Inquisitor enforced Vader's will with ruthless precision. Once a Jedi temple guard, he had turned bitter long before the Clone Wars ended. His loyalty to the Empire wasn't passionate. It was strategic. He believed the Jedi had betrayed themselves, and he used that disdain to fuel his cruelty. But even he knew Vader was watching. Always. Paranoia infected the ranks. They were trained to fight side by side, but no one ever turned their back. Every mission was a test. Every victory earned another week of survival. Some began to ask quiet questions. What happens when the Jedi are gone? Who among us will replace Vader? Is there a future beyond the blade? A few sought that answer directly. The fourth sister whispered rebellion. The sixth brother went rogue, hoping to claim a hidden holocron and challenge Vader himself. The result was the same for all of them. Death. Not swift, brutal, public. Vader made examples out of traitors, not because he feared them, but because the Inquisitorius needed to remember their place. Even those who served loyally were not immune. Trilla Suduri, the second sister, once showed promise. She led missions, orchestrated ambushes, and nearly wiped out entire lines of Jedi survivors. But she hesitated. A flicker of her old self remained. Vader noticed. When she failed to kill a Jedi Padawan, he intervened personally. He didn't scold her. He impaled her. Her death wasn't logged. Her name was deleted from the database. The other Inquisitors received no explanation. They understood. She had remembered who she was. That alone was treason. Despite Vader's control, whispers persisted. The Inquisitors didn't dream of rebellion. They calculated it. Quiet alliances formed between missions. Some sought holocrons. Others tried to uncover Vader's secrets. One even attempted to poison the food supply aboard Fortress Inquisitorius. It was discovered within hours. No punishment was announced. But by the next day, 3 Inquisitors were missing. Their quarters sealed, their weapons melted down. Still, Vader allowed the paranoia to simmer, because fear served him better than loyalty. Over time, their numbers dwindled, not because the Jedi were winning, but because Vader no longer needed them. The rebellion grew. Jedi sightings became rarer, and with every success, the Inquisitors grew more uncertain about their future. They weren't Sith, they weren't Jedi, and they were never treated as equals. The rule of 2 didn't have a clause for 10 numbered tools. Some tried to leave. Most failed. A few simply vanished, likely hunted down by their own former allies. No farewell, no closure. Their organization didn't collapse. It was quietly absorbed. By the time of the Galactic Civil War, the Inquisitorius had become a relic. Sidious shifted his attention to Death Stars and Admirals. Vader turned inward, focusing on his obsession with Luke Skywalker. The Inquisitors became obsolete, burdens with lightsabers. Their existence was buried by design. The Empire erased them from official records. No names, no statues, just quiet deletions. Their temples were destroyed, their bodies discarded in unmarked graves or left to rot on forgotten battlegrounds. No hymns, no echoes, just silence. Some historians now debate if they were Sith at all. Technically, they weren't. They never earned the title, but they followed Sith commands, used Sith weapons, embraced Sith cruelty, and most importantly, they betrayed everything they once believed. They weren't corrupted, they were coerced, then discarded. Their legacy isn't in victories, it's in what they lost. Names, families, purpose. The Jedi Order taught them peace. The Empire taught them fear. Neither taught them how to live between. And so the Inquisitorius passed into rumor. To most of the galaxy, they were myths, phantoms with red blades, tools turned traitors, hunters who became the hunted. Their stories are spoken only in fragments, no names, only numbers, no graves, only ghosts. Anakin Skywalker died long before his body burned on Mustafar. His final breaths as a Jedi came not with a lightsaber in hand, but in the choice to kneel. When he called Sidious Master, the betrayal was complete, of the Jedi, of Padme, of himself. From that moment on, he became something else, not a Sith Lord by passion, but by punishment. Vader was forged in consequence, not conviction. The slaughter began at the Jedi Temple. He didn't hesitate. The children didn't stop him. The fire didn't stop him. He killed what he had once sworn to protect, not out of hatred, but out of desperation. Sidious promised him power to save Padme, and Anakin believed him, because belief was easier than grief. But Padme died anyway. Her death didn't shatter Vader. It sealed him. His body was mutilated, his lungs replaced by machines, his face hidden beneath a mask that would never breathe for him. The armor became his prison, but it was never the source of his torment. That was inside him, silent, constant. There was no comfort, only duty. Vader hunted Jedi across the galaxy. With the Inquisitors at his command, he extinguished the remnants of the Order. Each death brought no satisfaction, only silence. He killed without pleasure, because pleasure was something Anakin had known. And Anakin was gone. He obeyed Sidious, not out of loyalty, but necessity. The Emperor kept him alive, gave him purpose. But Vader never forgot that it was Sidious who lied, Sidious who twisted the truth, Sidious who allowed Padme to die. And yet, he served him. Day after day, war after war, because rebellion would have meant admitting he was wrong. Vader wasn't a true Sith in the way Bane or Plagueis had been. He didn't seek apprentices to teach. He didn't build a legacy. He existed in the shadow of another, always the blunt edge of someone else's will. The rule of two remained unbroken, but it was hollow. Sidious didn't groom Vader for succession. He groomed him for control. Over the years, cracks formed. Encounters with Jedi like Obi-Wan and Ahsoka forced fragments of Anakin to surface. But Vader buried them. He had to. Regret was a threat. Memory was weakness. He denied everything except power. Then came Luke. Not as a soldier, not as a rival, as a son. The revelation didn't break Vader. It tempted him. He offered Luke a place at his side, not because he wanted to destroy Sidious, but because he saw in Luke what he had lost, a chance, a choice. Luke refused him. Vader chased him across the stars, cornered him, dueled him, but still something shifted. Luke didn't want to win. He wanted to understand. He believed Anakin still lived. In the throne room aboard the second Death Star, everything collapsed. Sidious ordered Luke's execution. Vader watched, and in that moment he saw it all again. The lies, the fear, the manipulation. He had become the very thing he once swore to destroy. But Luke didn't scream like the others. He reached out. Vader moved. Not quickly, not with rage, with clarity. He lifted Sidious, ignored the lightning ripping through his armor, and threw him into the reactor shaft. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't revenge. It was rebellion against everything he had become. He broke the rule of two, not by taking a new apprentice, by ending the chain. Sidious died not to crown a new Sith, but to stop the cycle. Vader didn't claim the throne. He collapsed beside his son and asked to see him with his own eyes, not as Vader, not as a lord, just as a father. Anakin Skywalker died long ago, but in that final act, he returned, briefly, painfully, and with purpose. His redemption wasn't the cleansing of sins, it was a refusal. a rejection of the system that had fed on him. He didn't restore the Sith, he destroyed them. The dark side took everything from him, and in one final decision, he gave it nothing in return. Vader's legacy isn't power, it's the end of it. The Sith believed treachery was a crucible. That betrayal wasn't weakness, it was the engine of strength. The rule of two was born from this logic, a master to embody power, an apprentice to crave it. But this philosophy didn't ensure survival. It guaranteed extinction. Over 1,000 years, no system devoured itself more efficiently. Each betrayal was framed as tradition. Killing one's master wasn't taboo, it was expected. To show mercy was to admit failure. To hesitate was to fall behind. And with every cycle, the Sith lost more than they gained. Knowledge vanished when a master died prematurely. Secrets were buried in forgotten tombs. Holocrons shattered in duels fought not for justice, but supremacy. Their legacy is written in ruins. Entire planets, Korriban, Malachor, Exegol, stand as graveyards of ambition turned inward. Superweapons built to dominate the galaxy were never used against enemies. They were turned against each other, sabotaged before activation, or left dormant beneath the corpses of their creators. Sith temples became traps. Their libraries became warnings. They mastered immortality only to hoard it. Darth Bane taught his apprentice to kill him. Plagueis tried to live forever, but died in his sleep. Sidious returned in a clone's body, more corpse than conqueror. Every Sith who tried to conquer death ultimately found themselves isolated, paranoid, and betrayed by those they trained. The Jedi faced the Sith for millennia, yet in the end, they didn't destroy them. The Sith destroyed themselves. Krait's empire crumbled when his own followers turned on him. The Inquisitors, forged in torment, fell to internal violence and fear. Maul's empire lasted months. Dooku thought he could outmaneuver Sidious. He died on his knees. Even Vader, the most feared warrior of his age, broke the cycle not by killing a master and taking the mantle, but by casting it aside. No Sith dynasty ever survived 2 generations intact. Their strength, always measured in conflict, was built on a contradiction. They demanded loyalty while breeding betrayal. They craved legacy while ensuring no one lived long enough to carry it forward. And those few who did survive, they stopped calling themselves Sith. Acolytes remained, cults, scholars of the dark side. But they understood what the Sith never could, that the title itself carried a curse. To be Sith was to be alone, to inherit a name destined to be challenged, a masterhood fated to end in blood. The survivors chose new doctrines, different masks. They used Sith teachings, yes, but discarded the label. The galaxy didn't celebrate the Sith's fall, it simply stopped fearing them. Their artifacts remain, masks, blades, holocrons etched with forgotten names. Jedi warn young students not to touch them, not because the Sith might return, but because their madness lingers, not in spirit, in ideology, power for its own sake, legacy through destruction, victory through betrayal. Their teachings, like poison, still echo. But the throne, it stands empty. No apprentice waits in the shadows. No master whispers through a hidden holocron. The rule of 2 ended not with a duel, but with a decision, to choose compassion over domination, to choose someone else. That was the final betrayal, not of a master, not of a code, of the cycle itself.